Welcome into another episode of the News4JAGs podcast. I'm Jamal St alongside Justin Barney. We're in the dog days of the off season.
Man, it's tough, man.
Yeah, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel on some stuff right now.
It's tough. I mean, we got Tour de France going on, Olympic trials,
Wimbledon.
Yeah, it's one of those times. But man, Jaguars training camp in about 2.5 weeks.
I know he told me that earlier this week.
It's cranking,
and I was like, yeah, no, it's not 2 weeks away. We got a little bit more time to look at the calendar. No, it's about 2 weeks away. Okay, great.
Yeah, no, it's quick, man. It's when do rookies report?
Rookies report. What is it, like the 18th, 19th, something like that? That week. It's somewhere in there.
Yeah, and then the veterans following. Man, we have the first Teal the Show, the training camp edition, right?
Yep.
News4JAGs training camp edition, Teal the Show training camp edition, that July 15th.
Yep.
So we're coming up quick.
We'll have them rolling out Mondays and Fridays at 11:15 on News4JAGs Channel 4 and online on News4JAGs.com. Starting the week before training camp and rolling all the way through. And whenever the Jaguars are done. So we will. It's a good way to keep up with everything. We post them online. They're also on YouTube afterwards, so you can track them down and watch them even if you miss them live. We prefer if you watch them live, but hey, as long as you watch it, we're good. But it's a good way to keep up with everything. We normally have Frank Frangie hanging out with me in the studio as we kind of go through everything that's going on around the team, from reacting to the last game to getting ready for the next game, and a lot of the sound throughout the middle of the week.
Players are probably a little different than us. We're anxiously awaiting the start of camp in the regular season. Players are probably trying to grab and hold on to it as the last few dog days of summer winds down for those players as they start cranking things up.
I have zero doubt about it. So during this time, we've kind of had a little bit of time to talk and kick some ideas around. And one of the things that everybody kind of likes to do is talk about their Mount Rushmores of players. So we'll talk about our Jaguars Mount Rushmore of players, the best in franchise history. But we sat down and we're talking about that and got to the point where we were kind of like, well, this list really doesn't vary much. But you know what Mount Rushmore list for the Jaguars would vary? The worst players in franchise history. So we're going to go through our 4 best and 4 worst in franchise history because there is a lot of variance for the worst list, even though our best list kind of it matches up pretty closely.
When you've been one of the worst franchises for a period of good period of the 21st century, it's pretty easy to have some variety of those bottom. We call it Mount Bustmore.
Mount Bustmore. I like it.
So what we call them that. So the easy ones are the Mount Rushmore.
Yes.
The Jaguars social media team tweeted out a few weeks ago about their best, who's on your Mount Rushmore. And I thought Fred Taylor, former Jaguars great running back, his Mount Rushmore was pretty interesting because he did not include himself on Mount Rushmore.
No, he didn't, which was humble, while appreciated.
But completely
incorrect. but incorrect. Fred Taylor should be on the Mount Rushmore, and he is definitely on both of our lists. Our Mount Rushmores do differ. There's one player that's different on each of ours for one reason or another, so we'll kind of go through all of that over the course of the show, and I think a lot of you, hey, feel free to chime in, hit us up on social media. Actually, I'll pop those up one time. So there's our Twitter handles. If you got better guys for Mount Bustmore or the Mount Rushmore list, hey, feel free to hit us up and let us know who we left off or who should have been, who your top 4 are or bottom 4, however you want to look at it. Let's start with Mount Rushmore. Let's start with the good. That's a much easier list.
So easy. So I think 3 of these guys are complete locks on the Jaguars Mount Rushmore. For me, Tony Boselli is 1. I think you got Fred Taylor at 2 for me. Jimmy Smith is 3. And you got Mark Brunell at 4. So, you have the leading receiver in Jaguars history, a Pro Football Hall of Famer, recent 2022, and Tony Boselli, the leading rusher in Jaguars history, and Fred Taylor. He's one of the top 20 all-time leading rushers in NFL history. And it's crazy that Fred Taylor only played 2 16-game seasons in his entire career, which is just staggering to me, and still accomplished that. And Fred was banged up a lot. He had so many injuries in his career. He got the Fragile Freddie moniker, but I think as you get further away from that time period of Fred Taylor, you appreciate what he was able to do more. This is a guy who was a 230-pound running back. He cut like a scat back. He had such good moves. He was on some great Jaguars teams. He came to the Jags in '98, and he was drafted in the top 10, and he just a fantastic player. And I think, again, Fred Taylor was banged up. He had a lot of years where he missed a lot of games. but I would have loved to have seen Fred Taylor in a few more 16-game seasons. I think he would have been a lock for the Hall of Fame in that regard. And he was first-time finalist this past year. I do think he ends up getting in.
Hey, you mentioned the Hall of Fame. I'm going to say it again. I've said it before here on this podcast. They need to get Fred Taylor in the Hall of Fame. That's enough said.
He'll get in.
Yeah, I'm tired of the eventually.
He'll get in.
Tony had to wait long enough, and we can talk about Tony's career at some point. And there's a lot of maybe things that we could say along the way, but Tony is a Pro Football Hall of Famer, deservedly so.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But I think Fred Taylor should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And this is from somebody that grew up not watching the Jaguars every week.
Yeah.
Fred Taylor was fantastic and should be a Pro Football Hall of Famer, should be a no-brainer. And the committee needs to get their things together and get it figured out because this is a problem.
It makes sense because Fred Taylor, during his heyday, my first year in this business was 1998. Year Fred Taylor was drafted, and I had a chance to see. I mean, you followed Fred Taylor at Florida, you saw what he did there, but in the NFL with the Jaguars, he was just such a different back. He was big, and people see Fred Taylor now and see him on the podcast, and his Pivot podcast, and you can't gain an appreciation for how big Fred was and how the moves and how agile he was on the field unless you saw him at the time. And Fred, the Fragile Freddy moniker follows him, and whether it's fair or unfair, but he was a big guy, moved extremely well, multiple 1,000-yard seasons. Had Randy Moss not been playing his rookie year, the same year Fred was playing his rookie year, Fred would have been a Rookie of the Year. And I think it's like the Buffalo Bills losing 4 straight Super Bowls. At the time, the lovable losers, failures, and they were identified with that failure moniker. But the further you get away from that time period, the Bills, you appreciate them getting to 4 straight Super Bowls.
Hey,
it was
that's
remarkable
a feat.
What they did, and the further you get away from Fred Taylor's career, and again, first-time Hall of Fame finalist this year, you appreciate it for what it was. And Fred Taylor running for almost 12,000 career yards during a time where he wasn't him and Eddie George were these big backs and graceful big backs. You shouldn't have been able to move like that. I think the further you get away from Fred's career, the more impressive it is, his body of work, even with his injuries and the what-ifs. He was only a one-time Pro Bowler. They were just great times. And small market Jaguars, yes. Fragile Freddy, yes. But he'll get in the Hall of Fame one day.
Every running back in front of Fred on the all-time rushing list that was eligible for the Pro Football Hall of Fame is already in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
And a bunch behind him, too.
And a bunch behind him. Why does the list just stop right there?
Right.
That's all. I think that's the argument. I don't need to say nothing else. I mean, don't get me started on if Frank Gore gets in before Fred Taylor. I don't even want to go down that road because Fred Taylor is a Pro Football Hall of Famer in my book. We've gone through your Mount Rushmore. Look, no arguments. I think Fred Taylor, Jimmy Smith are fantastic. Tony Baselli, of course, first Pro Football Hall of Famer in franchise history. I think those 3 are the locks. We agree on those 3. So the 4th one is where I think we differ. He went with Mark Brunell. I went with probably the only other guy that I think can even be in the conversation. I opted for Tony Brackens. So Brackens leads the team in franchise history in sacks. He went for the guy throwing the ball. I went for the guy that was trying to stop the other quarterback from throwing the ball.
Brackens was awesome.
He was fantastic.
I loved Tony Brackens. He came in the same year Kevin Hardy did, in the 96 draft. He was a second-rounder. He's from Texas. The guy was awesome. I love Tony Brackens. Fred Taylor put Tony on
Fred Taylor put Brack in there. So, look, me and Fred are right there. We see
Tony was Josh Allen before Josh Allen. He was such a good guy bending that edge, and he had this rip pass rushing move. I don't know how many fumbles he forced, but it was quite a bit, and they were all because of this strip and rip move. And I love Tony. He's my favorite defensive player in Jaguars history without even question. I love Tony Brackens. He had a knee injury and ended up having microfracture surgery on it, which we all know over time is not a good surgery to have. Right. And it basically ended his career.
Sure.
But there's no disagreement. I mean, I think you could make a case for Brunell on there, MJD, Mercedes Lewis. I mean, there's some guys further down that list. But I love T-Brack. I no qualms there. I just wish we would have seen T-Brack a full compilation of his career because he was so good to watch.
I think there's about a 6-player loop if you're saying for your Mount Rushmore. You can go Brackens, Brunell, and MJD, and I think that's about the list that you can make a real solid argument for. Outside of that, you're starting getting into fringe territory where it's tough to really push them in. Just the Jaguars, they're a younger franchise
Right.
in the league, so they don't have that storied history. And for the large part of the franchise history, they've struggled.
They've stunk.
So
Right.
it's tough to have guys that are really, I mean, it's like we've talked about. All right, if the Jaguars are going to get another Hall of Famer, it's Fred or Jimmy.
Mm-hmm.
And then who? And then you kind of start you start looking at it and you're like, well, maybe Mercedes Lewis for longevity. Maybe, probably not.
And he's done a lot beyond Jacksonville.
Right?
Too.
Does he go down? Does he go down as a Jaguar? I mean, we were talking about it just a minute ago. Calais Campbell. Do you hitch your wagon to that? I mean, does Calais want to retire as a Jaguar? Because now he's done a lot for other teams. I mean, he had to stop before Jacksonville, and he's had now 3 stops since.
Right.
So how do you make that work? Because if it's not those guys, then you're still waiting for somebody in this current group to go and do something. Because I can guarantee you one guy that I know is going to be a Hall of Famer that ain't going in as a Jaguar is Jalen Ramsey. I can guarantee you they'd call him up. Hey, Jalen, you want to go in as a Jag? Nope.
Yeah, I think the top 3. I mean, Tony Baselli, no question.
Yeah.
The knock on him was longevity, which is certainly valid. The shoulder injuries in his career. I think Fred Taylor is going to get in there next. He should have been more seriously pushed in the conversation. But Jacksonville pushed Tony Baselli. That was the guy that they hitched their wagon to.
Mm-hmm.
And right or wrong, I mean, first draft pick in history,
Sure.
All Pro multiple times on the team of one of the best players in the 90s. Fred didn't have that caveat. The knock on Fred was his injuries and that he made 1 Pro Bowl in his career.
Well, Fred played with a bunch of great running backs. I mean, that was a running back era, and there were a lot of running backs that were kind of one-offs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about Larry Johnson was playing with Fred, and Larry didn't have longevity, but he had a couple of big seasons.
Yeah.
Priest Holmes did the same thing.
Fantastic.
Exploded on the scene and then disappeared. And it's tough. Fred was just consistent.
Mm-hmm.
He was really good in that period, but these guys came on the scene, exploded, and then disappeared. So that took away some of those options. These guys that exploded on the scene in the AFC.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, plus you also had guys like LT that were doing their thing. So
yeah, it's true. Edgerrin James. The list goes on. I think what hurts Fred is the same thing that hurts Tony. It's small market Jacksonville.
Yes.
And unlike Tony, Fred only had 1 Pro Bowl in his career. That's we think of the Pro Bowl as kind of abstract and you're not really paying attention to it, but Fred only made 1 Pro Bowl in his career. Had a lot of down years, and the thing that hurts Fred is he missed a lot of time. He played 2 16-game seasons in his career. Just 2. And that is, like it or not, injuries happen in the NFL. Fred was a different back. He was a big back. He had those injuries. He had terrible injuries, too. I mean, toward the groin bone in 2001. Terrible game right after 9/11. Tore his groin and played 2 games that season. Missed the rest of the season. So I do think you're gonna have those injury and longevity concerns when you're talking Hall voters.
Yep.
Sam Kavaris, former Channel 4 sports director, is on that Hall of Fame committee.
Mark Brunell's a former Channel 4 sports employee too, and I didn't put him on my Mount Rushmore.
but Sam and the other voters in there are going to have that debate where, how much does that hurt? And then you got the glut of players still up for discussion coming down the pipe in a few years. So I think it's going to be tough for Fred to get in a couple years. I do think he eventually gets in because, again, 11,695 rushing yards. Every guy ahead of you, besides Frank Gore, is in the Hall of Fame.
Well, no, every guy that's eligible. Frank hasn't been eligible
Frank
yet.
is not
Frank and
eligible
AP haven't been eligible yet. That's why I said every guy that's eligible,
they're in.
They're in.
So, I mean, Fred is 18th on that list, and you've got 15 of the guys ahead of you, 16 of the guys ahead of you who are.
The list basically stopped at Fred outside of guys that hadn't reached the longevity portion since they hung up the cleats to be eligible. That's the thing that didn't make sense is like you've got guys, again, don't get me started on Frank Gore. I will get on that soapbox. But Adrian Peterson, fantastic, first ballot Hall of Famer in AP, but still they hadn't reached the longevity.
Right.
Everybody else that was in front of him, done. Just an arbitrary point, they said, that's the list.
Right.
How does that make sense? Sam going to be real bored on that Hall of Fame committee once Fred gets in, though. I mean, at this point, he's going to be sitting there. He might start pitching Jimmy, and then maybe Fred and Jimmy. If Jimmy gets in too, he might go ahead.
Jimmy's been in the conversation.
Yes, he has.
The people who did not see Jimmy Smith play in his prime don't understand. I mean, Jacksonville's had so many bad receivers in history. Jimmy Smith was phenomenal. 12,000 yards receiving.
Yep.
He's got nearly double of the number 2 guy, Keenan McCardle. He's got more than double the number 2 of touchdown catches. Jimmy Smith, 66 touchdown receptions in his career. The next guy, Mercedes Lewis, 33. And that's a substantial difference. So in the gap between Jimmy Smith, who last played in like 04, 05, and now we're talking 20 years later, I mean, there's no guy pass catcher wise who's even in that conversation in Jacksonville. Right. There's no other guy defensive in the conversation in Jacksonville. I mean, Calais Campbell was here for a cup of coffee. So, Josh Allen, if he builds off that, and last season and has stacks those years, maybe in that conversation, but there's nobody else other than Jimmy Smith who is even in Canton, Ohio, at the end of the driveway. No, there's not a chance.
Into the driveway.
Let alone knocking at the door. There's nobody other than Fred and Jimmy even remotely in the conversation.
It'll end up at a gap. We didn't mean for this to derail into a Hall of Fame, a Hall of Fame reality for the Jaguars, but look at where it's gone. All right, let's go to our Mount Bustmore list. So we do have a little bit more variation here. In our Mount Bustmore list, because there are just there are just so many options that it's hard to choose from. All right, Justin, I'll let you go first. Roll them out.
So I went. When you think of busts, you always think of draft busts.
Okay.
But I've got 1 free agent bust and 3 draft busts. I know Jamal and I have some serious separation in here because there's so many to choose from. I mean, free agent busts. I'm wanting the clock back all the way to 1998 with my first one. He's widely regarded as the biggest bust in Jaguars history, in Bryce Paup, linebacker from the Buffalo Bills. He had come over after 4 Pro Bowl seasons. He was the NFL Defensive Player of the Year in '95. At the time, they gave him a 6-year contract worth about $22 million. That's a lot of money in today's age, a little about $42 million in today's market terms. So a signing bonus of $6 million, but at the time $6 million, which doesn't seem like a lot, but at the time, you transfer that in today's money, it's about $14 million in today's money. So he came over to a pretty good team and was supposed to be that missing ingredient. You're adding a 4-time Pro Bowl player, Defensive Player of the Year. You're adding him in the mix. This is a Jaguars team that, remember, played for the AFC Championship in '96. In '97, you were back in the playoffs. You went 11-5, won the AFC Central. And you're going into '98 saying, we want to take that next step. We need some defensive help to get us over that next hump. Bryce Paup, you're coming over. You're going to come off the edge. You're going to be an every down linebacker. He gets in here thinking it's going to be that guy. He never fit in. He never fit in. And with so many accolades, and the fact of the matter, he was 30 years old at the time, the downslope of his career, and he never fit in. He was miscast. He had 7.5 sacks in 2 years. And why I put him in that mix of the biggest free agent bust in Jaguars history, even though we've had others. Nick Foles was bad. Julius Thomas was bad. But Bryce could have been that missing ingredient for Jacksonville. Remember that in '99, that team went 14-2, only losses to the Titans. You get to the AFC Championship game again, lose that third one to the Titans. That was their best opportunity for a Super Bowl. Bryce Paup could have got him over there had they signed somebody else instead of Bryce Paup, but he was a complete bust. He's my number 1 on Mount Bustmore. The other 3 guys are draft picks. C.J. Henderson, terrible. Terrible. Number 9 pick in the draft a few years ago. Would you the 9th pick in the draft? Do something,
expectations.
Buddy. Do something.
Yeah.
His first year, he plays 8 games.
Yep.
Siphoned him off after that, injury list. His second year was the Urban Meyer year, if you remember.
I do.
C.J. played 2 games before they basically gave him away for a ham sandwich and a backup tight end. And
hey, that was Dan Arnold.
Dan Arnold.
They liked his character.
He
was on the leadership committee.
So C.J. Henderson's my number 2 guy.
Okay.
Blaine Gabbert is 3, quarterback. Yeah. The second coming, supposed to be, he was even projected to be maybe the number 1 pick in the 2011 draft for a little bit of time. Cam Newton ended up going number 1. The reason I got Gabbert in here, you trade up 6 spots to get Blaine Gabbert. Trade up, like, okay, I'm gonna get my franchise quarterback. Forget you had David Garrard on the team at the time. You trade up for Gabbert, 6 spots with Washington. And, oh, by the way, you take Gabbert, You thrust him into a starting role, who he clearly wasn't ready for. He went 5-22 as a starter, but you know who came right after Blaine Gabbert in the draft? Jamal, you know this?
Who came right after Blaine Gabbert in that
Gabbert
draft?
was pick 10. You know who came after him? Pick number 11?
No, who was number 11?
J.J. Watt.
Oh,
so
man.
You take Gabbert at 10. You trade up for him at 10.
Yeah.
Bypass. J.J. Watt is going to be a Hall of Famer.
Yes.
And Gabbert goes 5-22 as a starter in his time. He's scuttled, barely completes 50% of his passes while he's here. And you send him away and start the quarterback reset all over again. So terrible decision there. And my fourth guy is R.J. Soward. And I went back and forth on him a little bit because he was a lower pick in the draft. He was the 30th pick in the draft.
Yeah, still a first-round pick there.
Still a first-round pick in 2000. Remember, Jags are coming off an AFC Championship season. They need to get better. You had some salary cap issues. I mean, you're jettisoning players right and left. So this was a hugely important draft pick for Jacksonville and Tom Coughlin at the time. You got to hit it. You're in salary cap purgatory. You need a guy in a cost-controlled contract. You get R.J. Soward, who was a pint-sized receiver. He was 5'11", about $175. I mean, you get a guy who's this slot-type receiver, returner kind of guy, and he starts 2 games in Jacksonville, plays 13 games, has like 14 catches for $154, 1 touchdown, and poof, he's out of the league next year. Yeah. He kind of falls into that A.J. Jenkins kind of territory where A.J. Jenkins was a terrible reach by Trent Baalke in San Francisco, and he's washed out. He's widely regarded as one of the worst draft picks, first-rounders in NFL history. He's a Terry Parker guy, too.
So I was about to say he's a Jacksonville
which stinks, but he was a terrible first-round pick. And when you're falling into that, R.J. Soward in that conversation as one of the worst first-round receivers ever in the A.J. Jenkins mold, that's not good. And there's so many other guys to choose from. Derek Harvey they traded up for and gave more. There's been terrible free agent signings. I mean, Zane Beatles was a bad signing. I mean, there's so many bad free agent signings. But those are my 4.
Okay.
On Mount Bustmore, I've got the free agent signing of Bryce Pop and the 3 draft picks.
All right. Look, I can't argue with those. So I was surprised that some of the ones I had weren't on his list, but one of the ones that I was playing with or whether or not I was going to go with was R.J. Soward because it's just, I mean, it's insane. And I've heard some of the R.J. stories about what went wrong there.
Everything.
Basically everything. But like you said, there's so many to pick from.
So many.
When it goes here. You mentioned Derek Harvey. He didn't make my list either, but he is insanely, that was insanely bust.
Big time bust.
And
the reason I didn't go with
tough.
Harvey or Justin Blackmon is because those guys, as bad as they were, the Luke Jokel, I mean, they at least did something in their time in Jacksonville.
Okay.
They drew a check. Matt Jones, I mean, had quite a few touchdown catches, maybe 3,000 yards receiving, something like that. So busts like that, yes, they were terrible. And if you're doing a top 10 worst draft list, I mean, Matt Jones is on there, Justin Blackmon's on there, Jokel's on there.
Sure.
But Jokel was here for 4 years.
He was.
Matt Jones was here for a few years and caught touchdown passes. Justin Blackmon had a great season in the NFL before he had the substance abuse issues and went out of the league. So those guys at least did something. R.J. Soward, he did nothing. He played in 13 games and was gone. You've never seen him in the league ever since. Ever since.
All right, so that kind of leads me to my Mount Bustmore, since you kind of opened the door for a couple of my guys. So I did go with Justin Blackmon. Justin Blackmon is on my list. Insanely talented. You saw the glimpses of it, and the off the field stuff kind of it derailed it.
Right.
So to me that lands you on Mount Bustmore when everybody says, "Man, if only he could get it right," and he didn't.
Never.
And then he's on this exempt list and never came back, never could get it together, never got back out on the field. There was all of this talent. It was there. He's not a guy where you just say they missed on the draft.
Right.
Some guys you just miss. Like I can
R.J. Soward,
you just missed. He just wasn't an NFL guy. I mean, same thing. A.J. Jenkins, it just never worked. Yep. You never saw it. Justin Blackmon, you saw it.
Absolutely.
He was there. The talent, elite talent, the ability, but he just couldn't stay on the field because of the off the field stuff. To me, that lands you a spot on Mount Bustmore and a big old head there.
And the bad thing about Blackmon, the same thing with Soward. There were issues. There were red flags before the draft. It's not like
other teams pointed out.
Yeah, and it's not like he just came into the Jaguars and started messing up all of a sudden. I mean, he had red flags like were hanging off him like Christmas tree ornaments. There were just so many red flags with Justin Blackmon. I totally agree with that one.
All right, I did go with 2 draft picks. So
Okay.
my second draft pick is the other one you mentioned in Luke Joeckel.
Okay.
And when Luke Joeckel comes into the league, I mean, he was being billed as the next great left tackle. He was here. They were calling him Baby Baselli, and he was awful. I mean, he was terrible. Like, he washed out in Jacksonville, and then they were trying him at guard other places, and he just never worked. I remember the draft hype for him coming out. Jacksonville got this guy. He's a can't-miss prospect, and somehow it missed.
That was that's the worst draft in my lifetime, that draft. You had Eric Fisher at 1.
Yeah. Well, Eric Fisher was consistent and played.
And he's been terrible.
I mean, but he was at least there. Like, Eric Fisher called out a double-digit year career.
Yeah,
and Luke Joeckel, on the other hand,
I think Tony and Angie's babies at the time were better than Baby Baselli was. He was bad. He broke his ankle early on. It just was not good. And that was a terrible draft. Terrible draft.
It was a terrible draft, but so Justin Blackmon, Luke Joeckel, Baby Baselli. Look, once you get a nickname like Baby Baselli, I'm sorry, if it don't work out, it's all downhill from here, buddy. So they are my 2 draft picks on Mount Bustmore. Now, I have 1 free agent edition, and then I have 1 that I had to ask him what the rules of engagement for our Mount Bustmore, because this one is a little bit different. So I'm going to go with the free agent next. Okay. So I got here in 2019, my first Jaguars season. All the hype's there. Saxonville's still freshish. 2018 didn't feel great, but Blake Bortles is gone, and they brought in this new quarterback, and he's a former Super Bowl MVP. The hype is there. Nick Foles.
Woo.
Nick Foles is on Mount Bustmore because that train came off the tracks, and it did it quickly. People wanted Nick Foles gone, and they were so happy to see a 6th-round rookie in Gardner Minshew starting games instead of Nick Foles, because people were tired of the press conference. He was talking about how losing was a lesson, and people don't want to hear that. And he was very quickly jettisoned. So didn't get a whole lot of time to start. That broken collarbone. So my first Jaguars home game in the regular season, they're against the Chiefs. Hot as all get out. I'm on the field shooting the game.
Touchdown pass.
And I got I'm in the corner. He throws a touchdown pass to DJ Chark, and I'm just so happy that I got the shot. That's all I'm focused on. DJ's like right in front of me, and he's dancing, and I'm like, I got the shot. Oh, thank goodness I didn't miss it. And I'm like, this is perfect. This is Nick Foles' first touchdown pass of the season, and I got a beautiful shot of it. It's going to be on replay, only to find out that in the background, somewhere 30, 40 yards down the field, Nick Foles on the ground with Chris Jones on top of him in a broken collarbone. Not the first touchdown pass that I had in mind with that shot, but I was just excited I got the shot. I didn't see it. So,
Minshew Mania was born.
That's where Minshew Mania was born. Look, Nick Foles birthed Gardner Minshew and Minshew Mania, and somehow, it is tough to come in, be signed that offseason, like fresh signed that offseason, and lose your damn job to a 6th-round draft pick. Again, 2019, first season covering the team for News4JAGs. I'm outside. I didn't get here around the draft. I got here in July. So learning everything from scratch. I remember going out one morning because the players were arriving, the rookies were reporting for training camp, and they're like, go out and try and see guys walking by, and I don't know faces at this point. I knew the big guys. I knew what Josh Allen looked like. I remember Quincy Williams. I knew he was somebody because he had a real nice car. So I was like, shoot him. Yeah, get that. Gardner Minshew walked by me that morning. I didn't know who this dude was. He had a headband on and some jean shorts. Under zero circumstances did I think, A, he's a quarterback in the NFL, but B, that he's going to be starting games for the Jaguars. Zero circumstances did I think that. Lo and behold, what happened? Minshew Mania. Nick Foles is on Mount Bustmore for me.
Yeah, I totally.
100%.
$88 million quarterback.
And they ate all that money.
They did. And
wasted it.
It was tempered a little bit, I think, with Minshew. The love everybody felt for him and Minshew Mania and the excitement. But Nick Foles is there. No qualms.
He's got to be. And especially when you pay a guy that amount of money and and then you move on from him. Let's just say you found Gardner or you knew you were getting Trevor, whatever, and you were ready to move on. No other team was willing to let him start games again. Nobody was handing him the keys. Yeah, Mount Bustmore right there. Now, my last one.
All right.
My last one from Mount Bustmore. Now, this one was the one that I needed to qualify for to make sure that it didn't have to be just players.
Yep.
Because Urban Meyer, he's going on Mount Bustmore because
Is he chiseling Mount Bustmore?
He's
the architect of it?
He basically is. At this point, Urban Meyer's on Mount Bustmore. Shad Khan hires Urban Meyer. He does the press conference. He says, "This time I got it right."
Mm-hmm.
He didn't get it right. A year later, he was getting Urban Meyer up out of Jacksonville. And look, Urban Meyer goes right there. He didn't last one season. He is one of the worst NFL coaching hires in league history, one of the quickest to be out. I mean, the dude didn't even fly back with the team. Like, there are stories about teams leaving coaches on the runway and leaving them where they get fired and stuff. Urban let the team come back, said, "I'm going to stay here and go over and hang out with these college co-eds." Urban Meyer's on Mount Bustmore. 100% deserves the spot and deserves every bit of criticism that he has earned. The man was sitting there doing Swamp Kings interviews instead of coaching his damn team. He's on Mount Bustmore, and his head is probably the biggest because it needs to fit all the ego in there.
He's George Washington.
Yeah, come on now.
Mount Rushmore. Hey, no complaints. There's so many.
So many options.
I mean, Urban is the running joke. You don't even last 13 games in the league. Terrible.
I never thought. What was the coach for the Falcons that
Bobby Petrino.
Bobby Petrino that left. They said he didn't even tell anybody. He just slid a note under the door, and they found the piece of paper underneath the door. He was just gone. I was like, oh, nobody will ever top that. In comes Urban Meyer, like, hold my beer. Like, come on, man. Like, kicks the kicker. I mean, the lawsuit around that, Josh Lambo. Look, you can't make this stuff up.
There's so many choices for Mount Bustmore.
There are quite a few, and we left off a handful that could have been taught. Like you mentioned, Derek Harvey. I mean, Caleb Von Chason is worth mentioning. You give him the cop out because he was a lower first round pick, but come on,
Dante Fowler. The guys. Dante Fowler took a person's beer and threw it in the water. I mean, took a six-pack and threw it in the water, like stepped on a guy's glasses so he couldn't see. I mean, watched his girlfriend fight in the hallway. Dante Fowler is up there. And
and if we're depending on what you go by, Tim Tebow was just a camp body, but he was one of the worst camp bodies we've seen. This is a Mount Bustmore option. I'm just saying.
No, not even close.
He wasn't here that long, but I'm just saying that Ole block we saw in the preseason.
No way for Tebow. He's a camp a roster invitee to camp. No, it was a circus with him, but he's not even honorable mention.
All right, what about Jerry Porter?
Absolutely.
Jerry Porter. How about Hugh Douglas?
Hugh Douglas he's number 2 behind Bryce Paup in terms of free agency. I got Nick Foles. I mean, Zane Beatles, Drayton Florence, Jerry Porter, Laurent Robinson. I mean, the list of
goes on and on.
Waste, bust signings of draft picks that were terrible. I mean, Eben Britton was bad. Mike Pearson was bad. Michael Cheever. I mean, the list is just epic. Of Cordell Taylor. We could spend we could spend into the regular season talking about the draft bust history, free agent bust in Jaguars history. So many. If you went and asked sports people around town or people in the building who've been for a little time, you may get 4 different ones.
Well, you definitely get different answers because there's just so many options. Maybe one day, maybe 30 years from now, the Jaguars will have so many options for their Mount Rushmore of players because, this is the beginning of prosperity for the team. Right. So maybe when they hit that 60-year anniversary, there'll be a lot of options for that Mount Rushmore. Right now, Mount Bustmore is very populated. It's very populated with options. And definitely we'll probably continue discussing this for a little while because we do still have like 2 weeks until training camp. Sounds like we might get an idea of some of the schedule for training camp maybe next week. I hear there are going to be a lot of chances for fans to see some camp practices this year.
Very nice. Yeah, second year of Miller Electric Center.
Second year of Miller Electric Center. You're going to get joint practices coming. Tampa Bay Buccaneers are coming to town for joint practices for a week in the middle of preseason. And I hear there's going to be a lot of chances for fans to get out, so that'll be good. Again, we'll have plenty of coverage. We'll keep these News4JAGs podcasts rolling. Once training camp kind of gets here, we do kind of an instant reaction to camp out there on the field every day, so you'll have a lot more News4JAGs podcasts podcast rolling your way, daily editions every time we have a training camp practice. Plus, he mentioned at the beginning of the show, those Teal the shows are going to start rolling. So those will start rolling as training camp starts. So you'll have that on Mondays and Fridays coming your way. Once training camp or once the regular season gets here, we have another Teal the show that starts. That one's going to be on Tuesday this year. If you pay attention to everything we do, we did those on Wednesday last year, and we kind of started in the middle of the season. This year going to be on Tuesdays. It's going to be a live on location show. So if you're here in Jacksonville, hold on, just press pause. I'll tell you where we're going to be having the show in a couple of weeks as we get closer to the regular season. But just maybe bookmark some of those Tuesdays through the regular season and come hang out with us as we talk some Jags on Teal the shows throughout the year. So we got more Jaguars coverage than anybody else, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise. So make sure that you are keeping your ear to everything that we got rolling if you want to keep up with your favorite team. Hey, thanks for hanging out with us, and we will see you next time.